When Victoria Sterling watched the Coast Guard call off their search for her missing husband after that devastating storm off the Bahamas, her tears were genuine, tears of relief. Michael Sterling's luxury yacht had been found capsized and burning, with no sign of survivors. The insurance payout was swift, the sympathy endless, and Victoria's new life of freedom seemed perfectly secure. But 12 years later, as she stepped aboard the most exclusive cruise ship in the Caribbean for her honeymoon with husband number 3, the last face she expected to see welcoming passengers was Michael Sterling, now the owner of the entire cruise line and very much alive. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. The glittering skyline of Miami's Brickell Avenue stretched before Victoria Sterling like a constellation of promises she could never touch. From the 42nd floor of her penthouse prison, she watched luxury yachts drift across Biscayne Bay while her husband, Michael, conducted another heated phone conversation about territorial disputes with competing yacht brokers. His voice carried that familiar edge of controlled fury that made her stomach clench with practiced anxiety. At 34, Victoria possessed the kind of refined beauty that graced charity auction programs and society magazine covers. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves, her emerald dress cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her smile could command attention across any crowded ballroom. Yet beneath this carefully maintained exterior lived a woman who felt more like an expensive piece of property than a human being with her own desires and dreams. Michael Sterling had built his maritime empire through a combination of legitimate yacht sales and questionable dealings that operated in the shadowy spaces between legal and criminal enterprise. At 48, he commanded respect through intimidation rather than admiration, his connections extending into political circles where favors were traded like commodities and silence was purchased with campaign contributions. His wealth provided them with everything money could buy, except the one thing Victoria craved most desperately: freedom from his suffocating control. Their marriage had deteriorated into a performance where Victoria played the devoted wife, while Michael portrayed the successful businessman who had everything under control. He monitored her credit card purchases, questioned her whereabouts during every absence, and made decisions about her life without consulting her preferences or opinions. Friends and family saw only the luxury lifestyle and assumed Victoria lived in paradise, unable to recognize the invisible chains that bound her to a man who viewed her as another asset in his portfolio. The breaking point had arrived 6 months earlier when Victoria discovered the extent of Michael's paranoia and control. Hidden cameras throughout their home recorded her every movement. Private investigators followed her during shopping trips and social events. Her phone calls were monitored, her emails read, and her social media accounts accessed through software that tracked every interaction. The realization that she lived under constant surveillance had shattered whatever remained of her hope for improving their relationship. Victoria's desperate search through Michael's private files had revealed information that changed everything. His life insurance policy carried a face value of $8 million, with additional accidental death benefits that would double the payout under specific circumstances. More importantly, the policy contained clauses that would expedite payment if his body was never recovered, particularly in cases involving maritime accidents where remains might be lost at sea. The discovery coincided with her meeting Tony Castellano at an art gallery opening in South Beach. Tony possessed the kind of dangerous charm that made conversation feel like seduction, his dark eyes holding secrets that promised excitement beyond the suffocating predictability of her current existence. He claimed to work in maritime insurance consultation, though Victoria sensed that his expertise extended into areas that legitimate businesses preferred not to discuss openly. Their relationship developed through clandestine meetings and encrypted messages that Victoria convinced herself were simply friendship with someone who understood her frustration. Tony listened to her complaints about Michael's controlling behavior while offering insights into insurance law that seemed remarkably detailed for casual conversation. Chapter 2. Storm Clouds Gathering. Tony Castellano's expertise in maritime insurance fraud extended far beyond theoretical knowledge into practical experience that had netted him millions over the past decade. His specialty involved orchestrating accidents that appeared completely natural to investigators while generating maximum payouts for his clients. When Victoria described Michael's controlling behavior and substantial life insurance policy, Tony recognized an opportunity that could fund both their escapes from their current circumstances. The plan they developed over several weeks of secret meetings involved staging Michael's death during a routine business trip to the Bahamas. Tony's connections in the maritime insurance industry had taught him that yacht accidents in international waters received less scrutiny than domestic incidents, particularly when weather conditions could explain equipment failures. The key was creating a scenario where Michael's death appeared tragic but inevitable, with circumstances that prevented body recovery. Tony introduced Victoria to specialized contacts who could provide the technical expertise their plan required. Marcus Webb, a former Navy explosives specialist turned criminal contractor, could design delayed detonation devices that would destroy a yacht completely while making the explosion appear accidental. Dr. Sarah Chun, a disgraced pathologist with gambling debts, could provide a corpse from a morgue that would pass casual inspection if partially burned remains were discovered. The psychological manipulation that accompanied their planning was subtle but effective. Tony never directly encouraged Victoria to murder her husband, instead framing their discussions as hypothetical scenarios that explored possibilities for escaping her trapped situation. He suggested that Michael's death would solve multiple problems simultaneously, freeing her from an abusive marriage while providing financial resources for starting over somewhere safe. Victoria found herself researching maritime accidents during her isolated evenings at home. She studied Coast Guard search procedures, insurance investigation protocols, and weather patterns that could provide cover for their planned operation. The intellectual challenge of orchestrating such a complex scheme gave her a sense of purpose and control that had been missing from her life for years. The timeline they established centered around Michael's upcoming business trip to Nassau, where he would be inspecting several luxury yachts for potential acquisition. Victoria would accompany him as she often did, providing the perfect witness to his tragic accident. Tony would be positioned nearby with equipment and personnel, ready to execute their plan once Michael was isolated aboard one of the vessels. Neither Victoria nor Tony anticipated that Michael had begun to suspect his wife's betrayal through surveillance methods that exceeded even his usual paranoia. Hidden listening devices throughout their penthouse had captured fragments of encrypted phone conversations, while tracking software on Victoria's devices revealed communication patterns that suggested clandestine relationships. Michael's discovery of their plot would transform their carefully planned murder into something far more dangerous than either conspirator had imagined. Chapter 3: New Identities, Old Secrets. The explosion that destroyed Michael Sterling's yacht off the coast of Nassau created a fireball visible for miles across the Caribbean waters. Coast Guard vessels arrived within an hour to find debris scattered across several square miles of ocean, burning fuel, creating an oily slick that made underwater searches nearly impossible. Victoria's hysterical testimony about her husband falling overboard during the initial blast provided investigators with a tragic but believable narrative that closed the case within days. The insurance payout of $16 million arrived in Victoria's account with remarkable speed, expedited by Dr. Sarah Chen's falsified dental records that identified charred remains as belonging to Michael Sterling. Tony Castellano collected his substantial fee through offshore accounts, while Victoria transformed herself into Miami's most eligible widow, her grief performance convincing enough to attract sympathy rather than suspicion from both authorities and social circles. What neither Victoria nor Tony realized was that Michael Sterling had survived the explosion through a combination of paranoia and preparation that exceeded their expectations. His discovery of their plot had given him time to arrange his own staged death, using their plan as cover for his disappearance into a new identity. The body they had placed aboard the yacht was discovered exactly as intended, but Michael had escaped through underwater breathing equipment and a hidden speedboat that carried him to a predetermined safe house. Michael's transformation into Marcus Stone involved resources that his criminal enterprises had established over years of planning, for potential legal troubles. Swiss bank accounts, false documentation, and plastic surgery provided him with a completely new identity, while his supposed death eliminated any possibility of being traced to his previous life. The man who had once controlled every aspect of Victoria's existence now possessed the ultimate freedom that came from being legally dead. The psychological impact of watching his wife celebrate his death while collecting insurance money based on his murder had transformed Michael's personality in ways that surprised even him. The controlling businessman evolved into something far more dangerous. A patient predator who used his maritime knowledge and hidden resources to build a new empire while planning methodical revenge against the woman who had tried to destroy him. Victoria's subsequent lifestyle as a wealthy widow attracted attention from men who viewed her inheritance as an opportunity for their own advancement. Her pattern of marriage, mysterious accidents, and insurance payouts would continue for over a decade, creating a trail of evidence that both law enforcement and Michael Sterling would eventually use to ensure her destruction. The woman who had planned one perfect murder had unknowingly triggered a cycle of violence that would ultimately consume everyone involved in her carefully orchestrated deception. Chapter 4: Collision Course. Victoria's marriage to tech billionaire Richard Blackwood in 2023 represented the culmination of 12 years of perfecting her craft as a predatory widow. At 46, she had maintained her stunning appearance through expensive procedures and rigorous self-care, her beauty now enhanced by the sophisticated confidence that came from successfully eliminating 3 wealthy husbands without arousing official suspicion. Richard, at 62, possessed the kind of massive fortune that made previous inheritances seem modest by comparison. The Aurora Princess cruise ship represented the pinnacle of luxury travel, a floating palace that catered exclusively to billionaires and celebrities seeking privacy along with opulence. Richard had booked the presidential suite for their honeymoon cruise through the Caribbean, unaware that his new bride was already calculating the timeline for his accidental death. Victoria viewed the isolated maritime environment as perfect for another tragic accident that would leave her widowed but wealthy once again. Marcus Stone had orchestrated Victoria's presence aboard his flagship vessel through a complex web of manipulated recommendations and strategic marketing that guided Richard toward this specific cruise. The man who had once been Michael Sterling now commanded a maritime empire worth over $2 billion. His presumed death having provided the perfect foundation for building legitimate businesses that laundered money from various criminal enterprises. His patient planning over 12 years had led to this moment of confrontation. Victoria's recognition of her supposedly dead first husband struck her like physical violence as she stepped aboard the Aurora Princess. The man greeting passengers at the gangway possessed Michael's exact features despite subtle changes that plastic surgery and aging had created. His silver hair and weathered face initially made her question her own perception, but his dark eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had once made her feel like prey being studied by a predator. The psychological impact of seeing Michael alive sent Victoria into a state of shock that she struggled to conceal from Richard and the other passengers. Her mind raced through implications that threatened to destroy everything she had built since his supposed death. If Michael were alive, her insurance fraud could be exposed. If he had been watching her subsequent crimes, evidence might exist that could send her to prison for life. Michael's greeting was perfectly cordial, his professional demeanor revealing nothing of their shared history to the other passengers boarding his ship. But Victoria caught subtle signals in his expression that confirmed her worst fears. He knew exactly who she was, had planned this encounter carefully, and was prepared to destroy her just as thoroughly as she had once tried to destroy him. The woman who had spent 12 years perfecting murder was about to discover that her greatest victim had been planning his revenge for even longer. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. The first evening aboard the Aurora Princess unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of psychological warfare. Victoria struggled to maintain her composure during the welcome reception, while Michael circulated among passengers with the practiced charm of a successful businessman. His transformation into Marcus Stone was complete enough to fool casual observers. But Victoria recognized subtle mannerisms that confirmed his identity beyond any doubt. Michael's approach was methodical and terrifying in its patience. He appeared at her table during dinner, introducing himself to Richard with warm professionalism, while his eyes conveyed unmistakable messages to Victoria. He knew about her subsequent marriages. He knew about the suspicious accidents that had befallen her other husbands. Most chilling of all, he knew she was trapped aboard his ship with nowhere to run. The revelation came during their second night at sea, when Michael arranged a private meeting under the pretense of discussing Richard's potential investment in the cruise line. Victoria found herself alone with her supposedly dead first husband in his luxurious owner's suite, surrounded by evidence of the empire he had built using her betrayal as motivation. Michael's survival story emerged through calm, measured words that carried more menace than any shouted threats. The underwater breathing equipment, the staged explosion, the years of careful planning, while watching her repeat this same deadly pattern with 3 additional husbands. He had documented everything, collected evidence, and waited for the perfect moment to destroy her as completely as she had once tried to destroy him. The USB drive he placed on the table between them contained financial records, recorded conversations, and photographic evidence spanning 12 years of Victoria's criminal activities. FBI agents were already aboard the ship, disguised as passengers and crew members. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case for multiple counts of murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Victoria's desperate attempts to negotiate or threaten her way out of the trap revealed the depth of her transformation from victim to predator. The woman who had once sought freedom from an abusive marriage had become something far worse than her controlling husband had ever been. Michael's patient revenge was about to deliver justice that the legal system had failed to provide for over a decade. The psychological impact of realizing she had been manipulated for years, that her careful planning had been anticipated and countered at every step, shattered Victoria's composure completely. The predator who had stalked wealthy men through marriage and murder was about to discover what it felt like to be the prey in someone else's carefully laid trap. Chapter 6: Justice at Sea. The arrest unfolded with precision that demonstrated months of careful coordination between federal agencies. FBI agents emerged from their disguises as passengers and crew members, surrounding Victoria in the ship's main dining room, while other guests watched in stunned silence. The handcuffs clicked into place as charges were read. Multiple counts of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering across 4 different states. Victoria's composure was finally shattered completely as she realized the magnitude of the trap that had been constructed around her. 12 years of careful planning for successful murders and millions in fraudulent insurance claims had all been documented by investigators who had been building their case since her second husband's suspicious death. Michael's cooperation with federal authorities had provided them with evidence that no defense attorney could challenge. The legal proceedings that followed revealed the full scope of Victoria's criminal enterprise. Tony Castellano, Dr. Sarah Chun, and numerous other accomplices were arrested in coordinated raids across multiple jurisdictions. Financial records showed a pattern of deliberate targeting of wealthy, isolated men who could be manipulated into marriage and subsequently eliminated through carefully staged accidents. The woman who had portrayed herself as a victim of circumstance was exposed as a methodical predator who had refined her techniques with each successive crime. During her trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence that painted Victoria as one of the most calculating serial killers in recent memory. Recorded conversations, financial transactions, and witness testimony from survivors of her various schemes created an unshakable case for premeditated murder. Her defense attorney's attempts to portray her as a victim of abuse fell apart when evidence revealed her systematic targeting of vulnerable men for financial gain. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Victoria Sterling received 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, effectively ensuring she would never again have the opportunity to destroy innocent lives for personal profit. Her conviction marked the end of a 12-year crime spree that had devastated multiple families while generating millions in fraudulent insurance payouts. Michael Sterling disappeared into witness protection following the trial, his cooperation with federal authorities making him too valuable and too vulnerable to maintain any public identity. The man who had been presumed dead for over a decade remained legally deceased, his new identity known only to a handful of federal marshals responsible for his safety. The cruise line empire he had built was quietly sold to legitimate investors, its profits donated to organizations supporting victims of domestic violence. The Aurora Princess continued sailing Caribbean waters under new ownership, its passengers unaware of the dramatic confrontation that had played out in its luxury suites. The ship's reputation for exclusivity remained intact, though security protocols were quietly enhanced to prevent similar incidents in the future. Victoria's cell in federal prison provided her with the isolation she had once craved, though not under circumstances she had ever imagined. The woman who had spent years planning perfect murders found herself with decades to contemplate the imperfect justice that had finally caught up with her predatory lifestyle. This twisted tale of betrayal and revenge proves that some traps take 12 years to spring. If Victoria's downfall kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime stories where justice comes when you least expect it.